Alright, so in this video I'm going to talk about how to name the objects in your text adventure game. It's very important that you name your objects according to certain conventions. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. So let's talk about some of the limitations or the rules that you have to follow. Objects can't have more than 3 words in their names, right? And that's just to save space because we're trying to cram a game into an incredibly small amount of RAM. So if an object's name is longer than that, it's going to get chopped off. So pile of tires, that's a fine name for a room or an object. Pile of old tires, well, that's 4 words. That's too long. And when you run that on one of the old computers, it's going to get chopped into pile of tires, right? And that's just because the table that stores the word IDs has only 3 slots for every object. And if you put in more words, it just gets ignored. So make sure that your object names are no more than 3 words. Like pile is fine, right? You know, tires is whatever. So 1 or 2 words is fine. The key, the rusty key, the old rusty key, that's okay. The old rusty skeleton key, well, now you've got a problem, right? That's 4 words. So just keep your names short. What else? Capitalization. Rooms, give the capitalize the first letters. So the Great Hall, make sure that's capital G, capital H. And objects should have lowercase names like flashlight, lowercase f. And that's so when the game is running in the terminal, it will print out like, you know, standard English capitalization. So if the word flashlight appears in the middle of a sentence, like you don't see the flashlight, right? The capitalization will be correct. It'll be lowercase. So that's just because it looks better. When you export it to one of the old machines, it all gets converted to uppercase anyway, so it won't really matter. But it'll look a lot nicer in the terminal when you're testing. All right, what else? Now you have to be very, very careful when you name your objects. You can't be lazy about it because the parser, which is the part of the program that looks at the words you've typed and tries to map those words to specific objects in the game, has to be able to figure out which object you're talking about. So like let's say you've got a game and you've got 5 keys, and you shouldn't ever have a game like that. Don't make a game with 5 keys. All right. But let's say you're in a room with 5 keys and you say take the key. The parser needs to be able to figure out which one you mean. And if you don't name your objects correctly, if you're not clever about it or not smart about it, or if you get sloppy, right, the parser won't be able to figure out which one you mean. So let's look at some of the cases where problems happen, and let's look at how to fix that. So this is all called disambiguation. Like, so ambiguous means, I don't know, there's confusion. You could mean this, you could be that, right? So disambiguation is the process of removing ambiguity, which is, you know, in our context, it's the process by which the parser tries to map the words you've typed in to a specific object in the game. And if you don't name your object correctly, the game will not be able to disambiguate. So these problems happen when the objects have conflicting or overlapping names. And this generally happens when objects with conflicting names are in the same place at the same time. So it's okay to have 20 rooms named forest. You know, if you can have a big maze of forest rooms, great. You want to create a big forest. That's fine because you're not going to be in all of them at the same time. You're not going to be in one place and have 20 forests there, right? You can only be in one forest room at a time. So that's fine. But let's say you're in a room and there's 2 tables and they're both named table. Well, that's a problem because when you say look at table, there's more than one. The parser cannot map the word table to a single object, and it will say, I don't know which one you mean. So and we have to be able to figure out how to fix that, and that's why we have to give our objects uniquely, we have to name our objects so that they are uniquely identifiable. There's always a word that's unique to that object. Let's look at another problem here. This happens all the time, and it happens particularly with locks and doors and keys, which is why you should limit the use of locks and doors and keys in your game. 99% of the problems with disambiguation happen with doors and keys. Here's a scenario. There's a key and a rusty key in this game. So there's 2 doors and there's 2 keys. One is named key, the other is named rusty key. Well, we've got a big problem here. Now, notice that object 15 here in our game, well, the word rusty uniquely maps to that key, right? So the word rusty is only associated with object 15. So if we type, take rusty, well, the parser can say, okay, well, rusty, that maps to object 15. Good, I know which object you're talking about, no problems there. But let's say you're in a room and there's a key, object 10 here, and the rusty key, which is object 15 in our game. Well, we have a problem because key maps to object 10 and it maps to object 15. And there's no word for object 10 that's unique. So there's no way for the parser to ever figure out whether you're talking about object 10 or object 15 when you're using the word key. So the way to get around that would be, in this situation, would be to name object 10 like the old key, the small key, the steel key, the skeleton key, so that there's a word that uniquely maps to object 10. So let's say you type get skeleton key. Well, if the rusty key is there too, the word key applies to both objects, so that's okay. But the word skeleton, that only applies to object 10. So now the parser can figure out, okay, you mean object 10. And so there's an example. This happens all the time, particularly with doors and locks and keys. So here's another scenario that's happened more times than I care to talk about. People will say, oh, okay, there's a key and a door key. It's like, why are you calling it a door key? Keys, like, don't tell the player that the key is for a door. Just describe the key. It's a steel key, a rusty key, a skeleton key, a magnetic card key. And a door. So again, we've got that naming collision, right? The word door could apply to the key or it could apply to the door. Just have a door and a key in that case. Like you've got if you're dealing with doors and keys, like the names shouldn't overlap. Just name your objects uniquely and you'll avoid all of these problems. And your game will run much more smoothly. So make sure when you name your objects that every object has a word that's kind of unique to that object, and that way when the player types it in, the parser will be able to disambiguate and figure out exactly which object you're talking about. So what we're really getting at here is limit the use of doors and keys. Well, name your objects correctly, like give them unique names. It's okay if they overlap with one word, but make sure that every object has a word that's kind of unique to that object. So because when the disambiguation errors happen, it's not really the fault of the game, it's the fault of the designer who didn't name the objects uniquely. So, but back to the doors and keys. Doors and keys really aren't puzzles so much. Like they get kind of annoying after a while. It's okay to have 1 or 2, that's fine, but 3, 4, 5, oh God, no, nobody wants to be carrying around 5 keys, because think about it, you have to type in all those unique words like open the rusty door with the rusty key, right? And now it just gets to be a pain in the neck to type. So and there's other ways to make your game more interesting, like you can block off areas of your game with you've got to move the crate, there's a hidden door, you've got to push the bookcase aside, or you've got to pull the torch and that makes a door slide open. You have to put the golden idol on the pedestal and that makes it a wall open, or you've got to find the ladder, find the rope. That's another way to block off areas of your game and make the player search and map out your space and then realize, oh, I need okay, right, if I use the rope over here, then I can maybe tie it to the branch and climb up or climb down, or and then remote switches. I pull the torch in one room and you say, oh, in the distance you hear a door open, and now the player's got to figure out, okay, well, where was that door? Right now I've got to go map the whole thing out again and figure out what changed. So there are much more interesting ways to create gates between areas of your maze or areas of your map than just locks and keys. And if you use those, your game is going to be much more fun to play, and you're going to force the player to explore more, and your game will really be more immersive and get suck the player's mind into the game. So there you go. So make sure you name your objects correctly. Every object should have a word that uniquely maps to that object, and generally make sure that you're not overusing the doors and keys trope. So, but if you have any questions about that and you do run into any of these problems, after I'm done screaming in the parking lot, I'll be happy to help you resolve all these and get your game being awesome and running perfectly well. So there you go. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about this, just ask for help.